And time to continue, as Ger said, the Glen Kilmacud Crokes follow. Delighted to welcome to the show this morning the former GAA President Nickey Brennan. Morning, Nickey. How are things?
Very good, guys.
This is a bit of a mess, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I suppose it's one way of putting it, all right. But it was always going to be a process. I think we've been hearing a lot in the last couple of days about Rule 6.44, but I don't think anybody's mentioned Rule 6.43. It says the award of a game rests with the committee in charge, acting on the referee's report. So we have to say that referees' matches are decided ultimately by what's in the referee's report. 99.999% of the time, that's pretty routine. We all know the result. The referee will file the report. That's the end of it. But if there is something that has happened in the game, the committee in charge have an obligation to wait to see would the referee include anything in his report. Now, I have no idea if Derek O'Mahony included anything in his report in relation to the substitutions that took place in Croke Park on Sunday. And actually, while I was in Croke Park on Sunday, I was tied up doing interviews after the hurling game, so I didn't get to see any of the football game. But it's pretty obvious that extra players were used at the end of the game and could be deemed to have had a bearing on it. So they had to wait for the referee's report. And if the GAA, in my view, acted purely on the basis of what they saw themselves, they could be setting a very dangerous precedent. Now, I think, so that's why the onus is put on Glen. This is not the first time this has happened. This is a common occurrence where the team that loses the game, if it feels it has lost the game in a manner that wasn't within the rules of the game, then they have the right to appeal. And I suppose that's the rationale behind it, because anything could happen if you just, if the committee in charge, in this case the Central CCCC, took upon themselves to make the decision to replay the game. It could open a big can of worms. And so I'd say that's my view of what the thinking was on it.
Okay. Can you explain the can of worms to us, though? Because I don't really understand what the can of worms is when a procedural issue like this, which is clear and the facts are agreed, everybody agrees, there's 16 men on the field when that ball is kicked in at the last moment. Once that is established, whether or not it's in the referee's report, apparently it wasn't, is the information that we're given, but maybe that's incorrect, that has been reported. But what kind of worms would there be if the GAA at that point, which under their rules they're entitled to, said, we think there's been an issue here, we're investigating it, and we'll have an announcement for you. Like, why? I suppose I get your point, right? That they're following part of their own rules, they're ignoring another part of the rules which would have allowed them to intervene. But it does speak to a lack of leadership in a situation where the biggest game of the year has been tarnished.
I think you may have put your finger on it there. You're talking about the biggest game of the year. Well, obviously the biggest game of the year in a club football context, of course, you're spot on there. I think the issue here is this was a high-profile game. It was pretty evident before the game, the final whistle was blown, that there was an issue in relation to the extra players on the field, particularly in relation to the last substitution, where the Kilmacud player that was supposed to come off was actually still on the field and in a prominent position to defend their goal. So that's a fair point that you're making there. But because this game was high profile, it was on TV, it had multimedia coverage, it was very obvious to people that an indiscretion took place. So if the body controlling this game, the National CCCC, took the decision, the game has been replayed, full stop, and no more about it, that's fair enough on one hand, on one level. And you're correct that you could construe that absolutely from the rule. But what happens when we get down to lesser profile games where a club deems there is an indiscretion? There's no cameras, there's no reporters, the referee doesn't see it, and they feel that there's as much injustice on their side as well if the game is not replayed because the opposing team did have more than 15 players on the field. So I think that is the concern, and I'm only surmising here, by the way.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because
I'm thinking that's probably what the GAA are saying. And while the rule doesn't specifically state that, I think they're cautioning on the fact that if they make a decision on this, then that's why I'm saying it could potentially open a can of worms down for lesser games where there's no TV coverage, no radio coverage, and there is no way of knowing that it actually happened other than if the referee puts it in his report.
Are you surprised, Nickey, that the GAA haven't been more vocal, that we haven't heard from the President or the Director General in recent days?
Well, not really. I mean, the point about it is when it comes to matters like this, it is the CCC they're the people who are dealing with the matter. It's not really up to the President or the Director General to interfere in the workings of a committee at this stage. I mean, it could potentially get to that at some stage, but I think it's up to the CCC. Bear in mind the referee's report probably was only submitted at the earliest on Monday, possibly Tuesday. So they have to work around that. I am quite sure that Derry Kent and his committee have been engaging in a conference call to discuss the matter and to consider their options and look at what the situation might be. But think back to the infamous Meath Louth game back at the time. A very similar scenario arose. Now, I know, to be fair, God rest him, Seamus Howland was a personal friend of mine, no longer with us. He would have engaged with me to see was there any possibility of maybe getting them to agree to a replay, because his hands were tied, and he felt his hands were tied as well, on the basis that if the Leinster Council ruled that game must be replayed, it could have huge knock-on effects for games within nationally, not just within the province.
Yeah, I do wonder. That's an interesting point, right? In retrospect, wouldn't that have been the right thing to do, though? I think we all agree that a replay of that game would morally have been the right thing to do. And then if the rule book needs to catch up with that, you make changes. I think that the rule book is great, and obviously you need it in an organisation which has a gazillion games every year. But there are definitely moments where there's an opportunity to step forward and say, there's a problem here with the rules, and there's a problem with the implementation of the rules, and we all need to do the right thing. Like we were asking earlier on, what's the right thing to do in this instance? If you strip away the rules and the procedures, what's your instinct? As a GAA man to the core, what's your instinct about what the right thing to do here is?
Yeah, the right thing to do here is replay the game. I have no problem saying that whatsoever. But you made a very good point there about the rules. We're going to have the GAA Congress in a couple of weeks' time. Now, it's probably too late to put motions into that. But I wish people now who are talking about the rules and that the GAA that needs clarity, let them sit down and let them put wording on the rule that would enable what you've just said to happen. But bear in mind that from an association point of view, while the club final is the pinnacle of any club player's game, the GAA would look on it that it's no different than if it was a Junior B game down in some other county as well. The same set of rules must apply. You can't have two different rule books. So how that would be interpreted within a rule to deal with something that is morally right that there be a replay, but it's not just as simple as that. If you're playing around with the rules like that, you certainly will be causing yourself some difficulty to officers around the country in their interpretation of that rule relating to their own competition. So that's how I see it, notwithstanding the moral issue that you quite rightly bring forward. And
is there something in, I don't know, streamlining the substitution process? Because it is chaos.
Obviously, the bottom line is that last Sunday was a clear case of the probably the whole refereeing team in Croke Park. There's two issues, I'd say here. Maybe they needed to be clear. They needed to be absolutely clear that the player going on did not go on the field until the player that was going off. Now, that didn't happen. However, we all know that in the closing stages of games, and not just in the All-Ireland finals, there is a clamour to put on additional players. It seemed to be running down the clock or whatever it might be. So it becomes very tricky that no matter what the fourth official might say to the player, you can't go on yet, the guy is probably 20 yards in on the field because he's been roared at by his manager. All very understandable in a panic situation to get in and defend there quick. And I cannot see how Mullen was still on the field and defending the goal area. He probably didn't even get the message to actually come off. So there probably needs to be something looked at there, that the referee simply does not allow play to continue until he gets the thumbs up from the fourth official that everything has been done according to plan, because of the general pandemonium that's at the end of games when they're very tight.
I'm aware we're talking hypotheticals here to some extent, Nickey, but so Glen have objected to the result. So say now the CCCC come out and say it's a replay. What happens if Kilmacud turn around and say, no, we're not going to play a replay?
That's a good question. You'll be into probably some new territory there. And this is obviously the ball is now very much back in the CCC court now that Glen have formally. We all know what the options of the CCC are. In my view, the option is likely, and again, I'm speculating here, I know no more about it than you guys do, that there will be a replay. Now, Kilmacud have a couple of days to assess that situation and put their own. And it might very well be that you'll be having a conversation with somebody else in a couple of days about what decision that Kilmacud makes if they're not amenable to a replay. So, look, that's maybe hypothetical as of now, but it's not an unreasonable issue to be putting forward.
So you got a contingency plan for all outcomes here. Like, more than likely, I don't know. What's your instinct about what the CCCC would do under these circumstances? Because there's a lot of wiggle room for them in the rules. They can forfeit the game, they can fine Kilmacud but allow Kilmacud to continue to have it, and they can just allow Kilmacud, or they can order the replay. I don't think they can just... Yeah, so the fine would be Kilmacud are champions. Is there a scenario where pressure is brought to bear on Glen for them to be offered the replay but to turn it down as well?
I suppose there's all sorts of possibilities, but I mean, I don't think there's pressure per se on Glen. I think in fairness to Glen, they were left in a very tricky position and it wasn't easy. I mean, their manager after the game more or less indicated that was it, this result was there and that's the end of it. But I mean, to be fair to the club, when they sat down and analysed this and realising that the only way the matter could be dealt with, unless just was forgotten about, was to lodge an objection. They knew that because they would have engaged with Croke Park, I suspect, on the Monday. So there's no fault on Glen's part here. I mean, it's not an easy thing for a club to lodge an objection here, and they do have my sympathies, in fairness. But equally in Kilmacud's Cork's case, they didn't go out to intentionally put in players. I can say that was a level of panic set in across the sideline. They got subs in. They needed to get players off. It didn't all happen in the sort of unison that you would normally see attached to substitutions because of it was a panic situation. And bear in mind that Kilmacud had a similar situation last year in the final against Kilcoo as well, where it was a late score changed the whole outcome of the game. So naturally enough, they were in a situation where they wanted to make sure that wasn't going to happen again. So I wouldn't be casting blame on anybody here. It's a thing that happens in GAA matches. And it'll happen again in the next couple of weeks in some other county, in some other game, or through the course of 2023. It's the nature of what we're doing, but we just have to make sure that the whole approach to substitutions maybe is more formally organised. And if it means holding up the game, particularly in the latter 3 or 4 or 5 minutes when that panic sets in and the tight game, so be it if that's what a referee has to do. And I suspect referees will possibly be getting, well, at inter-county level at least, getting instructions to just be a bit more vigilant when it comes to that part of the officiating.
That is ridiculous though, Nickey, isn't it, that the onus was put on Glen. They were clearly not happy as a club when they released their statement to say that the onus was put on them. I mean, it's farcical that the GAA would, as we were saying yesterday, wash their hands of it. And look, it doesn't matter what the precedent is or you know, the fact that they feel like they might have to intervene in junior games across the country if they intervene here. The GAA should never have left this up to Glen.
Well, look, I can understand you making that comment, and many people will agree with you there. I'm just trying to put forward a case of where the GAA are concerned that if they just took the decision themselves centrally that this game is going to be replayed without any recourse to either of the two teams because they saw that they have the proof on television, I think it would set an enormous precedent in terms of the outcomes of games and make it very difficult for county boards in particular, where the majority of our games are not televised or not covered and may not even have a media person at those games, and it becomes a can of worms where there is people come in even neutrals who might have been at the game can come in and verify, there was a 16 person on the field and it did impact the potential outcome of a game. I think that's the concern the GAA have, and if the rules have to be tidied up to accommodate that potential tricky situation, well then so be it, let the rules be changed. But look, it's not hard and fast. It's very easy to say the GAA should have just stepped in, and morally maybe you're right. There's certainly that side of it, but I can see the bigger picture and the impact it potentially would have on games around the country from here on in if that decision was taken, and that's why it hasn't been taken in the past. There's precedents here of where it's often said a county might offer to replay a match, and it happened in some cases, but that's just the situation the GAA found itself in, and it can have some criticism for that. But I can understand the process the way it panned out in the last couple of days.
Do you think, Nickey, that is your instinct that the game will be replayed and that Kilmacud will play the game as opposed to refusing to play the game? I'm purely speculating here, lads. I'm purely speculating. I think the game will probably be played in. Obviously not I don't think this coming weekend, possibly the weekend after next, and obviously it'll whatever the outcome will come. We'll just have to wait and see. And it's purely me speculating here on a Wednesday morning. What might the outcome be? Maybe there'll be developments during the course of today as the CCC meets. Maybe Kilmacud might take a different reaction to being asked to play a replay. I don't know, but I'm purely speculating, toss of a coin. There will be a replay, and it'll be a dinger of a game again. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be the most high-profile club game in a very long time.
I would think so. I think it would be. Now the speculation will probably end up in where will they have the replay? Will they play the next one up the country someplace? So look, it's going to mean many column inches, many minutes of talk on radio and TV for the next while. Sure, it does create an extra bit of buzz at this time of the year, maybe that wasn't expected.
100%. Nickey, good stuff. Thanks a million for joining us. Cheers.
You're welcome, guys.
It's Nickey Brennan, former president of the GAA there, says, giving us his views